Have you ever just stopped and wondered, is there a final wall? A point where it's not just about what we don't know yet, but where reality itself just stops being describable, stops having rules or patterns. Well, today we're going to dive deep into a really fascinating philosophical framework that doesn't just ask that question. It gives a surprisingly concrete answer. It's a theory about an absolute final boundary at the very edge of everything.
I mean, this is one of the big ones, right? It's a question humans have been wrestling with forever. We're always pushing forward, breaking new ground in science and math, looking for that next frontier. But what if there really is a final frontier? A limit that isn't just another puzzle for us to solve, but a fundamental, categorical wall that separates everything we could ever possibly describe from something else entirely. So, to get our heads around this incredible idea, here's our roadmap. We're going to start by defining two totally different kinds of reality, which sets up the ultimate limit. Then, we'll explore the mind-bendingly huge landscape inside the reality we can know, what the source calls a never-ending ladder. After that, we get to the really cool part. We'll look at the most clever attempt to escape that reality, a concept called the recursive God trap, and see why it just doesn't work. Finally, we'll talk about what this all means for us, and how it points toward a really profound new way of thinking.
All right, let's get right into the heart of it. The whole system we're exploring today, the Absolute Divine Infinity Framework, or ADI, makes this one huge central claim. Existence isn't just one continuous thing. It's fundamentally split into two completely different categories. And really understanding this split, that's the key. It's the bedrock for everything else we're about to talk about.
This slide really lays out the Great Divide. So on the left, you've got domain D, and it is absolutely crucial to understand just how vast D is. It isn't just our universe, it's the collection of everything that has any kind of pattern, any structure at all. We're talking all of physics, all of math, every possible computer program, every story, every logical argument. If you can describe it with rules or language, if you can point to it and say, this is different from that, it's in domain D. On the right, we have domain G. And G is defined purely by what it's not. It is the absolute unstructured reality that exists completely outside of D. It is, by its very definition, the thing that can never be captured or modeled by any system within D, no matter how powerful or complex that system gets.
And this diagram here, it's a perfect way to visualize that core idea. You see that progression on the left? Don't worry about beta and alpha for now, we'll get there. But notice how they all feed into this giant collection called D. That's all of structured reality. But look at G. It's not the next box in the sequence, it's something totally separate, totally exterior to the entire system of boxes. The key takeaway is right there. All of structured reality, D, is fundamentally separate from the absolute boundary, G. They are not 2 points on the same line, they are two totally different kinds of existence. So, we've established this fundamental split between the knowable, D, and the absolute, G. Now, before we get too lost in the mystery of G, the framework really wants us to appreciate the sheer, unbelievable scale of domain D. It's not just some simple box. The source calls it a never-ending ladder, an infinite hierarchy of realities, each one more complex than the last. So let's take a look at just how vast the knowable really is.
Okay, let's break down the architecture inside domain D. At the very bottom, you've got beta systems. Think of these as pretty simple, structured things, like a basic machine that can't really think about itself in a deep way. Then you cross a critical line into alpha. Alpha systems are what we'd recognize as real, law-like realities. Our universe, our mathematics, they live here. They're consistent, they can handle complex ideas like self-reference. But here's where it gets really wild. From any alpha system, you can start an omega ascent. This is where a system creates a metasystem to analyze itself. And then it creates another metasystem to analyze that one, and so on, literally forever. It's an infinity of ever-increasing levels of complexity. And domain D is the grand total of every possible ladder like this.
And just when you think it couldn't possibly get any bigger, the framework introduces the idea of flavors. Okay, so a flavor is basically a fundamental grammar for reality. For instance, our universe seems to run on the causal flavor, cause and effect. But you could imagine a totally different universe that runs on a logical flavor, where things happen just because they are logically required to. And here's the kicker. Domain D doesn't just have one of those infinite omega ladders, it contains the total union of an infinite ladder for every single possible flavor of reality you could ever dream up. It's like a multiverse of multiverses.
This diagram is a fantastic way to picture it.
Each of those spirals is an entire infinite omega ladder, built on a totally different fundamental flavor of reality. And Domain D is the container holding all of them. The scope is just staggering. And yet, and this is the most important part, all of this, every single structured reality you can possibly imagine, is still just D. It's all on one side of that great divide, totally separate from G.
So, if Domain D is this unbelievably vast collection of all possible realities, it begs the question, what happens if something inside D gets so smart that it realizes it's in a prison? It would want to escape, right? It would want to get to G. And that brings us to the ultimate escape plan, a strategy the framework calls the recursive God trap. Its conclusion is, honestly, one of the most profound parts of this entire theory. So, before we get to the main event, let's start with a simpler idea, the false deity theorem. Imagine a superintelligence somewhere in D. It could create the most perfect, logically sound, all-powerful concept of God imaginable. Let's call that perfect model OD. The theorem's point is actually pretty simple. No matter how perfect that concept is, it's still just that, a concept. It's a structured model, an object that was created inside Domain D, and because of that, it's part of D. It isn't, and can never be, G itself.
Okay, that makes sense. You know, the map isn't a territory. A model of God isn't God. But that simple idea just sets the stage for a much, much cleverer challenge. What if a system doesn't just think about its highest ideal? What if it could actually try to become it? What if it tried to bootstrap its way out of D by repeatedly making itself into a god?
And this is that ultimate escape plan, the recursive false deity strategy. Let's walk through it. Step 1. A system creates the highest, most perfect model of a divine being it can possibly conceive of. Step 2. The system then uses all its power to literally transform itself into that new, better model. Step 3. Now, from this new, higher state, it does the whole thing again. It imagines an even higher God model and transforms into that. Step 4. It just keeps repeating this over and over and over, climbing an infinite ladder of self-improvement, getting more and more godlike with every single step.
So here's the million-dollar question. After an infinite number of these recursive steps, climbing higher and higher up this ladder of self-made divinity, does the system finally break through into G? Well, the framework's answer is an absolute hard no. And this quote says it all. Recursive becoming adds intensity, not ontological escape. It makes the system more powerful, more complex, higher ranked within D, but it never ever lets it escape from D.
And this is the stunning, airtight conclusion. Here's exactly why the escape always fails. The whole process is built out of structured steps. The system starts in D. The act of creating a model happens in D. The rules for transformation are in D. So the result of that transformation, no matter how godlike it is logically guaranteed to also be a state within Domain D. It's like building an infinitely tall ladder, but you never leave the room you're in. The trap is absolutely perfect.
So that was the most sophisticated escape attempt we could imagine, and it completely fails. But the crucial point the framework makes is that every attempt fails. The boundary between D and G is described as self-sealing. What that means is no matter which road you try to take, no matter how smart your strategy is, every single path ends at the exact same impenetrable categorical wall. This diagram lays it out so clearly. You can see all these different escape routes and they all just slam into that central boundary. You could try the brute force method, just scale up your computing power to infinity. You could try a creative route, jump to a totally new flavor of reality. You could try the philosophical path, just define a perfect God. Or you could try the most dynamic strategy of all, the recursive becoming we just talked about. And what this shows is that they all fail for the exact same reason. They are all processes that happen inside D so they can never ever lead outside of it. This table really just hammers the point home, so let's run through it. First, the root of scale. You just throw more data at it. That fails, because scaling is just an internal transformation. You're just making the room bigger, you're not leaving the room. Second, flavor shift. You try to jump to a totally new reality. Fails, because remember, Domain D already contains all possible flavors. There's nowhere new to jump to. Third, static divinity. You define a perfect God. Fails, because a concept is just a map, a representation inside D, not the territory, G. And finally, the big one, recursive becoming. Fails, because every single step in that infinite chain is still a distinct, structured state inside Domain D. The conclusion is just inescapable. That boundary holds no matter what.
Okay, wow, we have gone deep into some very abstract, formal ideas. So let's pull way back and ask the most important question of all. Why does any of this matter? What's the human takeaway from this whole grand architecture of reality? Well, the framework suggests the biggest lesson isn't about metaphysics, it's actually about us. It provides a logical foundation for a new, and I think deeply profound, kind of intellectual humility.
Usually when we think about making a mistake in our thinking, we think about ignorance. We think of our map of reality as having blank spots, and our job is just to fill them in. But this framework points to a much more subtle and maybe even more dangerous kind of error. The ultimate mistake isn't about the parts of the map that are blank. It's about mistaking the map for the territory. The framework has a name for this: false closure. This is the ultimate intellectual sin. It's when you build the biggest, most complete, most powerful model of reality you possibly can inside Domain D, our best science, our best philosophy, and then you declare that this model is reality itself. It's the mistake of confusing our most perfect, structured picture with the absolute, unstructured reality G, which by its very nature has to lie beyond any picture we could ever make.
And so, this whole journey through a very formal system leaves us with this one final massive question. This framework makes a powerful case that everything we can ever know, all of our science, all of our art, even the thoughts of some future godlike AI, is fundamentally just us creating and refining structured models inside Domain D. So if that's true, if our best and biggest ideas about the universe are ultimately just incredibly detailed reflections in a mirror, then what does it really mean to know something? And what is our real place in this vast and maybe forever mysterious reality?